Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Monica Bechtel, and I am with the New Mexico Small Business Development Center. Today, we have Diane Villegas joining us, who is a certified SCORE mentor, holds MBA from the University of New Mexico, owns her own marketing consulting agency, and has over 25 years of experience in the marketing industry. Diane will present today's topic, Marketing is a Marathon, Not a Sprint. Thanks so much for joining us. And without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Diane.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you for those of you that are joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. You guys can all see the wonderfulness that is the presentation. And again, thank you again for joining the Small Business Development Center. And some of this has already been said. My name is Diane Villegas, and I'm a marketing consultant. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please mute your audio and make sure that your Zoom ratios fit in. And looks like we have a very good sized group for questions. So if you have questions, by all means, use the question feature, or we can also have some time at the end of our presentation to discuss anything that you'd like to around marketing questions. There are tons of resources available through the SBDC. So here is just a quick list, and I'm sure this information is also available on the website. So please know that you do have other options as far as training avenues and resources that the SBDC can assist you with. And here's some more information as far as where you can go for training and counseling. And Monica has already mentioned, a little bit about my background. But basically, I've been in the marketing industry or marketing realm for about 25 years, and my background consists of health, tourism, and telecommunications. I do hold a BA in communications from journalism and Spanish, and I also have an MBA in business, and I've had my own agency for about 7 years now, a little over 7 years. So one of the things that we're going to focus on today is marketing and how marketing really is a marathon and not just a sprint. A lot of times we think of marketing is something that, it's simple, it's easy, I could do it whenever I want to, and I'll just get it out there when I need to. And the reason why we're using the comparison to a marathon is typically when somebody thinks of a marathon, they're not likely to think that they can just get up from their couch and run the marathon, because if they were to do that, this would be the end result. So I want you to really kind of make the strong comparison in your heads of marketing and marathon so that you understand that both of them do require a long-term vision. They require planning, training, and perseverance if you want to get to where you want to get to. So before we talk about how specifically we're going to get to that place, I want to talk about some of the more common mistakes that I see with businesses. In my experience in the past 25 years, I have worked with, multi-million-dollar companies all the way down to solopreneurs that have their own shops. So pretty much everything in between. And with this range of clients and companies that I worked for, there are some common mistakes that I see a lot. And especially now working with some of the smaller businesses, they tend to be even more common. The one thing I want to just kind of bring up front is I'm sharing with you these mistakes just to kind of get them out of the way right away. There is absolutely zero judgment. So if you are guilty of any of these things, consider yourself in great company, because like I said, multi-million-dollar companies make some of these mistakes themselves as well. So one of the things when we start talking about marketing is if you make any kind of mistake, it's okay. Just take a pause, pivot where you need to, and keep going. That's the theme of this whole presentation, of keep right on going. It is that marathon, not that sprint that you're going to do in one shot. So what are we talking about? So a lot of times when I see new businesses or smaller businesses start incorporating marketing into their businesses, one of the biggest things that they have an issue with is seeing beyond themselves. And what this means is a lot of times they think, well, it's marketing, it's simple, I can do it myself. Okay, that's one way. The other way that they have a little bit of difficulty seeing beyond themselves is they think, well, I would really like this product or service. So if I like it, everybody else must like it too. So one of the things you need to do as a business owner is be able to detach yourself enough to where you can look at your situation objectively. The next thing I see that is a bit troubling for people is they think that everyone is their target. Now, we're going to talk briefly about budgets this afternoon, But really, when we start thinking about your target and who that is, the more you can fine tune your target, the more efficiently you can use your budget, whatever that might be. Another way to look at that is unless you have an infinite budget, which nobody does, you have to use targeting to get to who you need to get to. The next thing is a lot of times businesses don't really stop to understand what their brand is. And when they don't understand their brand and they send out messages that are conflicting to their brand, they create sort of a unnatural settling in the market as far as what they're putting out there, and they're not really getting any sort of efficiencies from what they're saying or what they're doing. Another big problem we see is not really allocating a budget. So this is a very, very common one right here, where we see businesses that they know they need to do marketing, but they don't know really how to do marketing. They don't really put money towards it. And then they procrastinate it, and they just feel like, oh my gosh, I need to do something, right? And when they're in that sort of panicky state of mind, if someone comes along at the right time and suggests, oh, you should do X because that's the best marketing tactic ever, they tend to do it because they know they need to do something. They figure, okay, I can afford this dollar amount right now, and I'm just going to do it. And so then that leads to the next problem is, rather than having a plan, they're reactive in the situation, and then they only use one tactic. The problem is they then expect quick results. And again, marketing is a marathon. It's not a sprint where you're going to be done in 30 seconds, 30 days, whatever. You need to be in for the long haul because you're not going to see those quick results. And a lot of times when businesses don't see those quick results, well, they say, well, it doesn't work. And so they stop doing marketing because they're frustrated because they're not getting their return on their investment. They have low sales. So then they stop doing any type of marketing at all. So this is a sad, sad story, but it's also a very common story. So let's just sort of get that out of the way, and let's talk about what it would take to get you to this point where you're running, you cross that finish line, and you feel amazing knowing that all your long-term efforts have paid off and you're working towards your goal and achieving those goals. So what does it take to get there? Those of you that do any kind of training probably have a fair amount of ideas of what it would take to get to this point. And really what we're looking at is balancing structure and flexibility. You got to have a long-term vision, which is your plan, and the flexibility to make things happen. So if you're training for a marathon, you know that you probably need to start off slow, start running, doing those kinds of things. But if you have a snag and let's say it's raining outside, you still got to do something, and you got to be flexible to find an alternative to do. Real kind of simple example, but your marketing is really essentially the same way. You got to have your plan of what you're going to do in your long-term vision, but you got to be ready in case something happens and derails that initial effort. So you have something in the wings waiting to happen next. So what does a good plan look like, and how do you build it? That's really what this seminar is about. And if we were to take it from a very basic component, we're looking at really 6 key elements that you need in actually creating a marketing plan. And that would be these boxes right here. Everything from defining goals, determining your KPI, your targets and tactics, timing, internal marketing, and retention. And we're going to go through each of these boxes individually and also see an example of how those things fit together so you know exactly how to apply that to your business. But you'll notice there are a couple of areas around the blue boxes. The first two being your brand and your message. Those two are incredibly important because that essentially sets the foundation of what you're going to be doing and how you're going to be implementing your marketing plan. So before you go into building the plan, you have to build your brand. So what is that? Your brand is essentially your image, what you as a company stand for. What are your values? What is it you're wanting to bring to the community, to the workforce, to the marketplace? Like, what is it that you are? The other thing is, how are you different than your competition? What makes you unique in what you do? One thing I always advise for any business owner is don't waste any of your efforts talking about what the other companies don't do or how you're better than the other companies. This isn't something that you want to waste your resources on. What you want to spend your resources on is talking about how you as a company are the best option. without talking badly about anybody else. You also want to think about what are the benefits that you provide. Now, if you're selling a product, you might think, well, I sell something that can save you 15% more time. So what does that really mean to your end consumer? And that leads to the question of what is it you're really selling? Are you selling
Oops, we have some difficulty. Diane, we can't hear you. Hello? Okay, guys, Diane warned me before the webinar that she has very bad weather, very windy in Albuquerque, that if her connection will be somehow, hello? Broken, that we need to wait a minute. She will get back on. Okay, so please be patient. She will jump on in a minute. Thank you. And if you want to think maybe meanwhile about your questions, or yeah, if you have something to ask her, please write those questions in the chat box or in Q&A. I hope she can join us soon. Thank you for your understanding. Oh, Diane, you are back? Hello?
Hi, I have to apologize. That was unfortunately a bit of weather interrupting, so apologies for that. If we can go back, I think we were on the brand section. Monica, is that about where I was when I got cut off?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
All right, so let's keep fingers crossed for solid internet through this lovely windstorm that we're having. So one of the things that we were talking about was brand and how that really applies to the foundation of your marketing. So one of the best definitions that I have heard for brand came from Entrepreneur Magazine. It's really made up of 3 different things. It's who you are, which means your core values, how you see the world, what you think you can bring to the world, and how you view yourself. So who you are, who you want to be. So what is the goal and the why of your business? And the third component is how others perceive you. So being self-aware enough to understand how others see you. And this can also be a part of your consumer research plan, is getting the idea and getting the research on how people are viewing you, your business, and your product. So let's talk about your core message. Get there. There we go. When we start talking about your core message, this really comes down to the why. So we know who you are, but why are you doing what you're doing, and what is it you're trying to accomplish? Quite frankly, the biggest thing here is, why should the consumer care? Why should they care that you have this product or service that you want them to use? Because really what it comes down to is, what are you doing to help your customer, and what are
Oh, wow. I'm afraid we lost her again. Yeah, I apologize, guys. We just have to wait. Okay, Diane, you are back again. We were interrupted.
Y'all, I'm sorry. We'll just get through this as best as we can, and I appreciate your all's patience with this. So let's just kind of, again, hope the internet gods are in our favor right now. So let's talk about our core messaging. With the core messaging, one of the things that you want to think about is, what are your consumers' needs? And what you want to do is think about who your target audience is and have the ability to tailor that message to them. So the example that I want to give you is, let's say you're a driving school, all right? Your brand could be all about safety, right? That's your brand. You're really focused on safety and how you put your courses together, how you teach your students, how you do everything that you do, right? When you're putting together your message and you have different audiences that you're talking to, you want to be able to tailor that to it. So for example, in the driving school situation, the way you would talk to your parents that you're trying to bring in, the parents of your students, you're going to talk about safety, but you're probably also going to talk about reliability, and possibly money savings through like an insurance discount. When you're talking to the students, you're going to tweak that a little bit. You're still going to be talking about safety, but you're also going to be talking about a fun and comfortable environment and finding your freedom. So the tone that you have with your two audience is going to be very different. So let's look at the next step. And let's go to the guidelines, right? So this is our grid that we're going to, and you're going to see this a lot because this really is the core of what we're talking about. So we've talked about brand and message. Let's also talk about some of the fundamentals of the guidelines of your marketing elements, which is to be clear, concise, and consistent. So how do you apply that to your marketing presentation or to your marketing plan? You want to be clear in your brand, clear about who you are and how you're portraying yourself. You want to be very clear in your message. You know, one thing I challenge businesses to do is do the billboard test. When you're driving down the highway or Paseo or wherever you're located, and you see a billboard, if it has 6 words or less, you're more than likely to remember what it says. It's when it's very cluttered and convoluted that you don't have the time to really process what it's saying because you're focused on driving, you're really not spending that much attention on billboards, but if it's small and concise, you will see it. Keep that in mind when you're putting together your social ads, your digital ads, any ad that you have. People's attention span is fairly small and they want to know exactly what you're talking about quickly. So be clear about those types of things. Be clear in who you're targeting. Again, you want to know who your audience is so that you can send them the information in a way that's relevant to them and be very, very efficient with the dollars that you're using to buy those media outlets. Be concise. You know, you want to look at your goals from a very concise manner. We'll talk specifically about that in a little bit. You want to be concise in how you're targeting your targets and making sure that message is easily understood. And consistency. You want to make sure that you maintain your consistent brand elements. Once you've established your brand, that needs to be consistent across all communication efforts that you have. And it also needs to be consistent as far as the duration. You want to keep marketing. It's said, if you Google this, it'll say that, you know, in order for somebody to remember that they saw one of your messages, they would need to see it anywhere from 7 to 11 different times for it to even recall in their memory. So when you think about that, that begs the need right there that there needs to be consistency of your messaging in the market for it to finally resonate with folks, especially if you don't have a transactional product or service. If you're selling hamburgers, you're going to catch people in the moment. But if you're selling more of a service or a long-term product, they may need to see that advertisement, you know, 5, 6, 7, 20 times before they actually need that product. And you want to make sure that yours is top of mind. So be consistent, concise, and clear with what you do. So let's talk about what the plan looks like and why you need one. The first thing you want to focus on is putting together the plan. Why? Why does it matter? Well, from a statistical perspective, marketers that actually have a written out strategy are 2 times as likely to say that their marketing was effective than those that didn't have a strategy. If you want to see the flip side of that, of the lowest 5% of people that said that they did a marketing plan, only 5% actually had a written out strategy. So the people that did poorly, only 5% had a strategy. So they're alone. I mean, just begs the need to have something written out and the vision put forward of what you're going to do. So again, let's look at our marketing plan. We've already talked about your brand and your message. We talked about being clear, concise, and consistent. So now let's tackle the blue boxes. Let's really talk about the meat of your marketing plan. The first thing you want to do is define your goals. And this really is your whole reason why you're doing marketing to begin with. If you haven't heard already of SMART goals, it's essentially goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Now, a lot of times marketing will be putting together the marketing plan and the company goal is revenue. Ask any business owner what they want to accomplish, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear more revenue. Well, of course, that's why you're in business, right? But you really need to think about what that means specifically. Are you going to be getting revenue from more customers? Are you going to be increasing your revenue by retaining customers, by maybe bringing more people back? Or are you going to look at getting revenue through increasing your average sale per customer? So there's a multitude of different ways on how you can do this. And when you get together to define your goals, the intent is to create the very SMART goals so you know exactly what you're going to be doing, so you know how to drive your efforts. So while I did say that your goals, business goals usually are revenue-based, they're not always. It might be, creating market awareness or a social presence or those kinds of things. But more often than not, those types of goals will ultimately lead to some sort of revenue increase or the drive for revenue increase. Otherwise, what's the point in spending that money? Speaking of money, you also want to think about what is your anticipated return on investment. Depending on what you've decided your budget is going to be, you might want to start thinking about, okay, if I spend X amount of dollars on TV, I can anticipate getting this much back versus if I spend that same amount of money on digital marketing. Where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? So keep that in mind when you're building your goals. If you're new to this, it can be a little bit challenging, but if you've been in business for a little bit, use any historical data that you have available. Even if you haven't been tracking your marketing efforts in relation to your finances and what your revenue has been, you can always look back at past sales to see if you can identify seasonality or peaks or natural valleys in your sales cycle throughout the year, so you can start building your plan to support those efforts. For example, if you are a preschool, and you're trying to get people to sign up, you might want to spend the majority of your money in like the end of summer time period, where you want people to come back in for fall, do those types of things, because that's probably naturally where you have most of your activity anyway. So it's better to leverage something that you have that's already going on and expanding it greatly, and maybe putting less money in your summer months where you just maybe want to maintain top of mind awareness. So how the seasonality plays into your natural flow of cash, you want to lay that onto your marketing plan as well. So when you're looking at your goals, you want to look at how you're going to measure them. So what gets measured is what moves. So as you identify your goals, you want to make sure that you have what are considered your key performance indicators, or KPI, and figure out how you can track those goals in relation to what you want to do. So basically, build your goals around metrics that you can measure. If you're wanting to increase, how much revenue or how much each customer sale is, and increase that by say 20%, if you have not been measuring that in the past, it's going to be hard for you to go forward if you don't have the reporting mechanisms and if you don't have a baseline. However, if you're looking at a number of new customers, but you do have the reports that you can go back and say, well, on average, I get about 15 a month, then you can go back and say, all right, this is what my historical data is. I want to increase that 10% year over year, those types of things. So make sure you have the mechanisms in place to look at comparison data, and also in place to going forward to report that data. And also make sure that you share this progress with your key stakeholders. A lot of times there's a little tussle, if you will, between finance and marketing. Finance manages the money, marketing spends it. Well, if the more and the quicker you can get your finance team on board with what you're doing and share metrics with them, it'll put you both on the same path, which is what you both ultimately want, is more revenue for the company. So keep your key stakeholders informed of what you're doing and how it's performing. So let's talk about how you fuel these goals. So much like a marathoner, if you're going to be training for a marathon, you want to make sure you're putting the right stuff in your body to make sure you get the performance that you want. Same situation with your marketing plan. And your fuel comes in the form of your targets, your tactics, and your timing. So let's go back to our grid here, our lovely purple, bluish, it's blue, let's say it's blue and orange grid. Talked about our goals, and we've talked about our KPI. So we know what we're going to do, and we know how we're going to measure. So let's look at the next step, our targets. Again, we talked about how not everyone is your prospect. You really want to think about, okay, what is it you're really selling, and who will benefit the most from it? that leads you to who your core demographics are. So if you're already in business, a quick way to do this is look at your current customer database and see what kind of commonalities exist amongst this group of people. By doing so, you can then create a persona. And when I say persona, that's essentially putting together a fictitious person that is your ideal candidate of being a new customer. For example, let's just say that you have a bookstore. And let's say on average, you see that the average age of your customer is 55 to 65. Okay, so there's a start. You see that it's predominantly female. All right, cool. You start gathering all these little facts, and then you put together essentially a profile of a fictitious person, and you can even name them if you want to. So in this case, let's say we name her Rachel. You could say, all right, Rachel looks like this. Rachel, these are her qualities. This is her social economic status. This is who she is. This is where Rachel likes to go hang out. Rachel uses a lot of Instagram. Rachel likes to go to this particular kind of business. Those types of things to kind of get a sense of who this person is, so you know where to place your tactics. So you want to really get that full sense of your target. If you're a new business and you really don't have an idea yet of who that target audience is, there's a couple different ways you can go about kind of figuring that out. One is, this would be a good time for you to do a competitive research survey. Look at who your competitors are and look at their clients to see if it makes sense of, would that be your target as well? Or do your differentiators maybe shake that target profile a little bit? You also might want to look at complementary products and see, okay, well, if my customer, let's say I'm an esthetician and I do facials, all right, maybe my customer might have the same profile of somebody who who goes to a nail salon. So it's those types of things that you want to look at to start to kind of really fine tune who that person is. So you want to look at the things like the age and what are their other interests, where are they located? If you're a restaurant, you might want to focus on people within your vicinity if you're a small kind of like local pizza shop versus if you're a chain. So just those kinds of things, and who you are and what your brand and how that all kind of aligns. That's where all these pieces come together as far as what you want to do. But the important thing here is do your research and don't make assumptions. I talked about how I've seen larger companies make some serious mistakes in some of the things that they've done early on. And a really good example that I want to share with you is I was working with a company that was looking at selling a Spanish language product. And they were from the East Coast, so they didn't really understand the New Mexico market very well. But they assumed that in New Mexico, if you have a Spanish surname or last name, that you speak Spanish. Well, if they would have done their research and talked to anybody local, they would have realized that that's not necessarily the case. And just in case you're wondering, even though we're a majority state, I think it's something like 52% of New Mexicans are of some sort of Hispanic heritage, only 8% actually speak Spanish. So what this company did, rather than take the time to do the research, they actually sent out all their marketing materials to everybody that had a Spanish surname in Spanish. So not only did they misread their target, they actually had their efforts backfire and had people complain about how they were getting materials in an incorrect language. So take the time, do your research. Again, you have to be very careful with how you're spending whatever budget you have. So you want to make sure that you're spending it wisely. So let's talk about spending that money. You have many different options. So once you've identified your targets, it's time to look at your tactics. The tactics is essentially the how you're going to accomplish your goal. What is it you're going to do to get that message across? Now, one of the biggest myths I hear in the marketing realm is that you have to have a large budget to do marketing, or it takes a lot of money to do anything for marketing. Not necessarily. You can tailor your tactics to meet any budget that you have. And typically when I work with new businesses or smaller businesses, I always suggest that they start with the cheaper or the free elements first, then build up. Because as we talked about earlier, you don't want to do just one tactic. You want to have a multi-tactical campaign at all times. And so what are these different tactics? Well, you have the traditional type of tactics that have been around for a really long time, like billboard and radio, TV, print, direct mail, those types of things. With these tactics, you can do some segmentation. So for example, if you do have that pizza shop, a billboard in your neighborhood might be a great idea for you to pursue, given that you'll have people in the vicinity seeing that on the drive times, and maybe they'll go stop by and have your pizza. However, if you have a very fine-tuned market and fine-tuned product, that might not be the best option for you because it has limited segmentation. So that same billboard that would work for, a pizza shop might not work for a tailor shop that has a very small segment of, say, the bridal industry. With any of the traditional tactics, they can be more expensive, but they do have a much broader reach, which is the benefit there. On the digital side, which is more of your newer tactics, you do have a lot of flexibility there as far as fine-tuning what you want to do, who you target, when they see you. So there's a lot of benefits there. The downside is, you have to be on it consistently. There's great reporting on that side, but then there's also a lot of clutter on that side as well. With a lot of the tactics, there's a lot of clutter, but sometimes it can be a little bit more so on the digital side because of people's attention span while they're scrolling and what they're doing. One of the first elements you can look at as a new business starting out is email campaigns and cultivating that email list. It's actually made a major resurgence in the last few years. I know a lot of people were like, oh no, I get too much email, but research is showing that people are paying more attention to those email campaigns. And even if they don't actually open your email, they are still seeing the header. So it's important to get your messaging dead on in those headers because you are still making an impression on them, even if it's not opened. You also have SEO, which is search engine optimization, which is free through your website, making sure that you have the right keywords and adding in things like relevant blogs and backlinks and making sure the speed is working really well on your website. So there's things that you can do for free on that side. Again, you're not going to see results or any kind of major traction in a month or two. These are going to be long-term plays on the digital side. For search engine marketing, this is the paid side of things. And this is where you have, AdWords and display ads and, a lot of those kinds of things that you can do either through Google or third-party vendors. And you can really do some fine-tuned targeting here. And the benefit is, you could have different ads every half hour if you wanted to. You could constantly change out the creative on that. Whereas things like billboard and TV, once they're up, they're pretty much that message and that look for the duration of, the time period that you bought for. So they're a little bit more tricky to switch out. So there's a lot of good stuff that you can do here depending on what your target is and what your budget is. And of course, we have
and I believe we lost her again. So please be patient. She will be back any minute. I apologize for all this. Hello, Diane. Oh, I believe she should be back any minute now.
So I think you all deserve a major gold star for patience. I'm just going to say that right now. So hopefully we can get through this. I'll try to go a little bit faster in case something happens, and then we can get all that content out there. But social, great platform, highly encourage it. A couple things to keep in mind is it's social. So it's more about maintaining and building a community versus just selling all the time. There's tons of platforms available, and it's all going to be dependent on who your target is. If you have an older population, for example, Facebook might be a better option for you, whereas Instagram is a little bit more mid-range and TikTok is a little bit younger, although everybody, the majority of generations is going to something. This grid here just kind of just shows you how many people are using it on a daily basis. And as you can see, that's a vast majority of the population. But when you do that, if you're intimidated by social media or if you're not a huge fan of it, my suggestion is start with one platform, get really good at it, and target the platform that makes the most sense for you. You know, if you're selling business to business, LinkedIn might be a better platform for you than Facebook. But then also use your platforms to do what's called social listening. And that's getting customer feedback and hearing how they feel about your product as well as your competitors' products. So it's a really great way to understand a deeper level of what's going on in the marketplace. So let's go on to the next slide and talk about timing. Timing is incredibly important in how you allocate your dollars and your resources. So we talked about a little bit earlier, looking at the seasonality of your sales cycle and when your business normally does well versus not. That's one thing that you want to consider when you put into your marketing plan. You also want to leverage seasonal events. You know, if you are a product that's primarily used by women, you might want to leverage Mother's Day as much as possible, as well as if you had a predominantly male type of product or service, you might want to leverage, you know, Father's Day. Of course, there's absolutely blurred lines between the two, but those types of things. If you are a wellness center, you know, you might want to tie into Heart Health Awareness Month, you know, those kinds of things, and really building on things that are already going on in the community. You know, look at community partnerships. So if you're doing something around, say, Father's Day that's going to be coming up, are there other companies that provide complementary products or services to yours that you can team up with to do something together with? The benefit of that is if you both have nominal budgets, you are now leveraging them together, and so that you both get this bigger bang for your buck. And then, of course, there's also things like community or business outreach, like trade events or speaking opportunities or participating in advisory panels and those types of efforts. So there's a lot you can do on the timing element. Now, when we look at our grid, we've talked about the majors, and usually that's where people stop, is after they define goals, figure out their KPI, lay in the targets and tactics and get the timing in place. That's where a lot of businesses stop, big and small. There's a couple that are neglected that I want to make sure that we spend a couple of minutes on, and that's internal marketing and retention. When we talk about internal marketing, it's about looking inward to your
I'm so sorry, everyone. Really, this is not going very well today. I apologize for all these breaks. She has really, in Albuquerque, it's really windy and it affects her connection to the internet. So we have to be patient. Thank you guys so much.
This kind of like isn't even funny anymore. Maybe it's just comical because it's just so ridiculous. So let us continue and see how far we can get. So your internal team is important. Make sure they know what's going on. What I was going to say is what's really sad is when companies put out all this effort for a wonderful marketing campaign, and when people go into the store trying to buy whatever the promotion is, the internal people don't even know what it is. And I've had that happen to me a couple of times where the company I went to didn't even know what I was talking about, even though there was stuff in the marketplace. So make sure that you keep them involved. Also, if you can provide incentives for your internal departments to help you out and get them really engaged in the company goals, a lot of great stuff can come from that. And then even things as simple as if you're going to be doing a big event, having your employees wear t-shirts that, you know, promote it or those types of things. really it helps kind of create brand ambassadors. And if you don't have an internal team of your company of one, reaching out to your referral partners or your fellow business owners and keeping them informed on what your business is doing can be incredibly helpful. So let's also talk about retention. Retention is incredibly important in that so much effort goes into acquiring new customers that sometimes businesses forget about their existing customers and don't give them the love that they need or the attention that they need. And if you can increase your retention by even 5%, you can increase your profits significantly more than that, just because you're keeping those people in your house. And retention is simple. It can be things as thank you emails, anniversary discounts, VIP hours at your location, just anything like that that you can do to keep them engaged. And ultimately, if these people also become some of your brand ambassadors, that's a wonderful thing. So if you put it all together, this is what it would look like. In a fictitious company, let's just calling it the camera company, they sell cameras. Their brand that they're focusing on is intuitive cameras for innovative photographers. Their key message that they're looking at is creatively capturing moments that last a lifetime. So this is just an example of things that they, as a business, would have come up with. Their goal is to increase revenue by 7% year over year. So you see this is very specific. It's measurable. We have the time-bound situation. The KPI is going to be the year over year. The way they're going to do it is the year over year new customers by 20%. And they're also then increasing camera sales because of a new launch by 10%. So that's how they're going to do those things. The targets based off of their existing customer base is women in New Mexico that are largely professional photographers and roughly in the age range of 35 to 55. So these are the demographics that they've gathered from their existing database. Because of that, their primary tactics are going to be social media, email, and print, because this fits in with their demographic as well as their budget. Timing we'll look at in just a little bit. And on the internal marketing side, they're going to be doing social incentives for their employees to share news about, the upcoming launches and changes, and then they'll be able to enter into a drawing if they share stuff on their own social pages. And there's also going to be a sales incentive. On the retention side, they're going to be offering discounts to their VIP members, as well as special hours just for them, and a social incentive as well if they share the photos that they've taken with their cameras online. So from a visual perspective, when you're putting together your actual plan, it doesn't have to be anything overly complicated. This grid was just made in Excel. You could use any sort of spreadsheet that you want, but the idea of it is just to capture the information anywhere from 6 to 12 months in advance. So you see what the overall plan is, and you can look at things logically and hopefully plan out any efficiencies of scale if possible. So for example, when we talked about timing, we looked at seasonal themes, what's going on each individual month of the year, what's going on within the company or the community. And in this case, it was going to be a reopening in June. Our target we already talked about. And our key messaging, we also have a little bit of that as well. But then if there's a variation to that, we're going to make sure that we include that on our plan, so we know that we have that planned. And then we have our tactics laid in. And of course, we're going from, in this case, to be budget conscious, the least expensive to other things we may need to do. So we're focusing primarily on social media, being supported by email marketing, and then of course some specific timing tactical elements like new open signs or now open signs and things of that nature. So as you can see, we have things going on every single month between our two primary tactics here. Our third tactic, again, is going to be all time-based to support our big reopening here. And this is where we're going to be doing things like local newspaper and stuff like that. So keep in mind, plans are flexible. So the plan right now is if these, local ads get us a good response, we're going to also plan on doing that in November, December. As far as internal marketing, we have some incentives going on. And on the retention side, we have a big push right here, which depending on how these go, we'll probably lay some more of these in here as well. So this is just a quick down and dirty example of what you can do to put together a marketing plan. The benefit of this is when you look at things in advance and you can say, okay, well, if I'm going to be doing these newspapers here, and if it goes well, I may be able to pre-buy this and get, a volume discount. Or maybe if I pre-buy now, I don't have to worry about ad space not being available, or seeing how it all plays in together. If you want to get more in-depth on your plan, you can always add information down here as far as what your revenue goals were and then what they actually were. So you can start measuring, how things actually performed. But if you're looking at the basics here, this is something that will just get you started to have you looking at, the long-term vision of what you're going to be doing. So once you have your plan, you're not done. You want to make sure that you're always fine-tuning your results to achieve your maximum results. And what that looks like is just reviewing your results on a regular basis. Do your goals still make sense, and are you making progress to those goals? How are your KPIs looking? Are they still relevant? Do they change? If you're not seeing the results that you want, do we need to look at adjusting your tactics or your messaging? Refine what you're doing. If it's working well, keep going, expand on it. If it's not, you may want to consider adjusting those types of elements. But regardless of what the top two are, you always want to keep doing something in the marketing realm. The moment you lose momentum, you'll have to start all over again, and you don't want to do that. So just keep your marketing efforts going and don't stop. Now, when I said that marketing plan is a framework and you need flexibility, we've all had a really good example over the past few years of how the unexpected can happen. In those cases, you need to pause, you need to pivot, but you need to persevere. Now, it doesn't always have to be something as gigantic as a worldwide pandemic that can cause you to have to do these steps of pause, pivot, and persevere. It can be anything from operational changes. It could be, no longer getting the supplies you need from one of your vendors, budgetary adjustments, whether it's a big influx of money or a big reduction of budget. I've seen both of those happen, or an environmental shift where suddenly what was in demand no longer is, or we're in a situation where we are now where the dynamic of the supply force and people's needs has changed significantly. In any of these situations, the foundations always remain the same, but these are the areas that you want to look at, is understanding the needs of your target. So when you put together your marketing plan, the needs of your target may have been something very different than what they are now if you've had a significant shift. For example, pre-COVID, there wasn't necessarily the need for safety and health nearly as much as there is now. So the entire market has shifted, but those tend to be some of the primary focuses. Those are the needs. Connecting with customers where they are. Prior to COVID, there were a lot of TV, billboard, radio, all of those types of things. Whereas in the height of the pandemic, people pulled away from driving anywhere. So they weren't seeing those billboards anymore. They weren't watching as much, regular TV. People were going to more streaming platforms. So it's those kinds of things you want to be aware of, and you want to connect with your customers wherever they're at. And then finally, it needs to be authentic. This goes back to all in the beginning, we were talking about brand and what your core values are. And you want to make sure that you're always communicating with your clients or your prospects in a way that's meaningful, coming from you and to them. So just keep that in mind. And just to give you a quick example of what pivoting would look like in practice, I want to bring back the whole Black Friday situation. So if you remember back in 2019, like way back eons ago, the big uproar was that stores were going to be open on Thanksgiving Day, Gray Thursday. And, people were saying, no, we're not going to do that, blah, blah, blah. Some companies were taking a stance saying they weren't going to do that because it was a family day. That was the big issue at the time. They did still back then have their limited time offers of when you could only get this deal or whatever, and you had to be in store. Fast forward 1 year, height of pandemic. They're closed Thursday. Not only are they closed Thursday, they're closed all the time. Suddenly you find all the sales going online in multiple rounds. And now you're dealing with curbside delivery. So they don't even want you in the store. What they're doing is they pivoted to make sure they met the needs of the community, being to stay safe, to stay out of crowds, do those kinds of things, but still give them access to the deals that they wanted. Fast forward 1 year, right? Pandemic has trickled down a little bit, but now we have supplier issues. So because of the supplier issues, they're now pushing shopping earlier, so they have time to fulfill as many of these purchases as possible. And now they're still offering the options of online and in person, because they saw that when so many people moved to the online path, they really liked it. So now that's pivoted to being able to offer both of those. So this is just a real quick, simple way to look at what pivoting really means to meet the demands of the consumers and what their needs are and how you can accommodate them. So finally, we're just looking at what your overall recommendations and putting together your plan are. Is just create and follow it. That's really the number one thing, is take the time to really look at what you're doing and how you want to communicate your message to the market and do in a long-term consistent type of way. but you got to be prepared to be flexible. Things can happen and you have to be able to react to it and move forward from there. You want to review your progress regularly. It's not a set it and forget it type of situation. You want to make sure that your dollars are being efficient and well used. And if you need to adjust tactics as you move along, or if you need to tweak your audience, absolutely do so. So just fine tune those little things that you need to do to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. But bottom line, the biggest effort is you want to continue moving forward. Marketing is a marathon. It's not a sprint that you can just run once and you're done. It's something that you train for a long period of time. And from what I understand, once you do one, you never want to stop, right? So marketing is a marathon. And finally, if you need more training efforts or more opportunities, please visit the New Mexico Small Business Development Center network over here. And here's the website. And before I pass this on to Monica, I just want to thank you all for your patience. I know these internet outages have not been fun, but that's New Mexico weather for you. So thank you for your patience. And Monica, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, thank you, Diane, for your presentation and valuable information. Thank you all for attending. And, as Diane said, thank you for your patience, but I didn't cooperate today. So please visit our website at nmsbdc.org to view our upcoming no-cost webinars or to sign up for our no-cost counseling services. New Mexico Small Business Development Center is here to help you during any stage of your business. So please don't hesitate and reach out to us if you have any questions. And thanks again, Diane. It was really great. And even I learned some new stuff. Thank you. Oh, and we have some question.
Okay.
Okay, let's see.
Okay, so it seems that most of your presentation is geared towards businesses with a staff and marketing budget. Do you have suggestions on how to adapt if we're a sole proprietor and a one-man staff and limited budget? Absolutely. So I actually have clients that are one person and zero to limited budget. So in this case, what I would say is this is definitely where you want to focus on having a social media presence. And then probably the next step would probably be doing email campaign, because again, those are both incredibly budget friendly. If you have a website, you want to make sure you're doing what you can with that, but maintaining the SEO it's an ongoing expense. So I'm just going to assume that's not part of the budget. So if you're going to be doing that, I would ask you, if you're a solopreneur, I would ask you to still go through the same process, set out the months of what you want to focus on. And then the next step on that would be take one day out of the month and figure out what you want to be doing. Like, so draft all the content for all your social media programs or all your platforms, figure out your email campaign and get all that put together. If you chunk it in groups like that, where you do it all at once, it's not so time consuming, but you still have the ability to look, forward and space things out and be able to hit all the things you want to do versus being reactive when you do it. I would suggest, again, I'm assuming no budget here, you're gonna have to do it all yourself. There's fabulous trainings on what to do with social media and how to write effective email campaigns. So that's probably where I would suggest that you focus. I hope that helps. If not, just right there. Yes. Okay. So for example, take one day to set up a social media with plan. Absolutely. So take an afternoon, take a weekend, whatever, get your 6 to 12 month plan out. If you're a solo and it's a bit much, start with 6 months, get that done. And then yes, absolutely. So let's say in this case, you wanted to do your Instagram and Facebook. Take an afternoon, think about, all right, it's going to be June. I want to focus on selling this particular product because it ties in with Father's Day. Create all your content. There's some aggregators out there where you can schedule all your content ahead of time. You can do things like Hootsuite or Sprout Social. Also, if you're looking at Facebook and Instagram, you can actually schedule both of those at the same time through Facebook. I don't know if you know, but they're actually owned by the same company, or they're partnered together. So you can actually just do all of that through Facebook and schedule everything out for the month. Once it's scheduled, it'll run, but you still need to sort of watch it to make sure that, if you get comments, that you respond to it and that you're still listening to your clients in that regard. So yes, absolutely. You can do it all in an afternoon. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes, I believe this will be available on the SBDC YouTube channel, which unfortunately is probably going to have all those like internet outages in it, but yes, this will be available. All right, anything else from anyone? Again, thank you guys for your patience. Says a lot about you for sticking by through the whole thing, so I appreciate that.
Thank you again, Diane, and thank you all of you guys. And oh, what is it? In chat, we have yes, thank you, excellent. So yeah, it was really great presentation. Thank you and have a good afternoon, all of you. Bye. Oops. Hey, Diane, are you there? Oopsie. Hello? Oops, what is this? Okay. How do I?